Episode 138, IRONMAN Mont Tremblant with the overall winner, Cody Beals. Welcome to the pursuit of the perfect race. I'm Coach Terry Wilson, and with each episode, I bring stories of athletes to you that share their experiences at races in order for you to learn how to have your perfect race. We will hear stories from athletes of all ages, abilities, and races of all distances. So regardless of where you fit in, there's something in it for you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let the pursuit begin. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the pursuit of the perfect race. Today I have the pleasure of talking with my friend Cody Beals about his recent overall win at IRONMAN Mont Tremblant, where he finished in a time of 8 hours, 10 minutes, and 36 seconds. This race took place on August 19th, 2018, with the temperature on race day being 61 and rising to 81 degrees. And the swim was delayed by an hour in 15-minute increments, with the water temperature being 71.5 degrees. Cody, I'm glad to have you on the show, and I look forward to hearing about your amazing race experience and, more importantly, your win at IRONMAN Mont Tremblant.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Terry. It's my pleasure to be on the show.
Awesome. So what made you want to do this race in the first place, man?
Well, I set my sights on this really a long time ago, going back basically to the end of 2017. And I'd been getting the question, when are you going to make your Ironman debut, for a long time, basically since I won my first professional half-distance race in 2015. And I really bided my time because I've always been very incremental with my goal setting, and I really wanted to make this debut happen in the right way. So it was the same thing with my debut with the 70.3 distance. I went under 4 hours and, made a bit of a splash. I wanted to do the same thing with the Ironman distance. And having been around a lot of Ironman athletes and stuff, I just had a lot of respect for that distance and what the preparation would entail to get it right. So I kind of stuck to my own agenda and ignored all the other armchair quarterbacks and stuff that were saying I should race it earlier. Waited until I was 28, and this really felt like the right year. I've had 6 70.3 wins leading into it over the past few years. So those were still really thrilling and validating and a lot of fun. I love that distance. But in many ways, I was ready for the next challenge.
Wow. So how long have you been a professional, and how many years have you been doing triathlons in general?
I went professional in 2014, and I did my very first triathlon at age 16, just a local super sprint triathlon on my dad's old lugged steel road bike, and had a pretty good time. Finished third overall, but, wasn't like a total standout performance or anything like that. Didn't race at all the following year, and just kind of dabbled in triathlon after that, just 1 or 2 a year. Didn't really get serious until after I graduated university in 2012, and really focused on it for a few years after that, before making the jump to the pro ranks in 2014.
Wow. So before you got into triathlon, did you have a background in swimming, biking, or running?
A little bit. I like to say that I had kind of half a swim background. So at age 9, my parents got me going with the local summer league swim team. And I regret that it wasn't sort of a full tilt swim team where we were doing many practices a week and stuff. This was like a few practices a week over the summer, parent volunteer coaches, a few swim meets, very laid back. But it definitely got my feet wet, so to speak, with competitive sports. And really, even before then, my parents got me going with other endurance sports like cross-country skiing and cycling, because they're really lifelong avid endurance sports people. So swimming was the first real competitive sport. And shortly after that, my mom, who's always a fantastic runner and raced over her years, she got me involved in running a little bit, and ran cross-country in high school, and then my last 2 years of university.
Wow. So as far as your training going into this race, what did this look like for you?
So like I was saying, I really wanted to get this debut right, and I knew that that would entail a lot of specific prep for it. So I didn't just want to roll in with my normal 70.3 fitness and give it a go. So after a pretty successful start to the season with 3 70.3 wins, I took a mid-season break and then really switched gears around the end of June. So after about a week off, I had 8 weeks leading into Mont Tremblant to focus exclusively on this race. So I didn't do anything besides just some local time trials, no other major racing. I was just hunkered down at home, really putting in my best training block of my life. And it was a bit of a leap of faith for me, because whenever my coach and I have attempted to do a long block like that mid-season, I've just really struggled. So I really got these shorter blocks dialed in. I've had some great results. Most of my wins have come off like a 3 to 5 week block in the middle of the season. Just a week to recover from the previous race, a few weeks to train hard, another week to taper. Whenever I've had like 2 months stretching before me, it's been pretty daunting, and I've struggled to maintain focus and just maintain quality training and recovery practices. And usually I've gotten sick or unfocused, or something's gone off the rails a little bit. So this was pretty unprecedented in that it was, a full 8 weeks and I managed to really stay focused and stay on top of my training. Of course, it got a little bit ugly with fatigue at points, but I didn't really miss any major blocks of time. Like there was a few off days, but no off weeks or anything like that in the past.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, when you look at your training overall, what was the most hours you trained 1 week?
You know, I've often thought I've been on the low side in terms of volume compared to my peers in long course racing. And I can definitely point to some athletes that train a lot more to me. My range is typically in the, let's say 20 to 25 hour range when I'm in the middle of a build. Yeah, I'll do the odd week that's more close to 30 hours, but that's pretty rare. And typically I'll be averaging even under 20 hours sometimes, especially for 70.3 training. So I think it's a myth to some extent that all these pros are doing 30-hour weeks every single week. It's kind of a joke in the sport that when pros are asked how much they train, everyone gives you their biggest run week number plus their biggest bike week number plus their biggest swim week number and then adds another 10% for good measure. So I don't know if it's that I don't know if it's that I actually train less than everyone or if I'm just a little more honest about it than most people. So yeah, 20 to 25 hours most weeks. That's kind of all I need. Any more than that, I start to get a little tired.
Wow. And you're working with David Tilbury Davis, and he's putting together your plan for you. Is this like a traditional 1, 2, 3, 4 week build with a recovery week? What does this look like?
Yeah, so I've been working with David pretty much my entire pro career. He kind of talent ID'd me early on and saw that I was a guy that had potential but was making a lot of mistakes as a self-coached athlete. And when I came into his hands in 2014, I was in pretty rough shape. Like, had just messed up my endocrine system, had low testosterone, basically due to a period of long overtraining plus undereating and stuff and other factors. So I was a bit of a wreck. And David really got me on track. He was coaching me on a full-time basis for a few years. And over the last couple of years, I kind of partly took the reins back. So the arrangement we have now is that I write my own training from day to day. And that's really the easy part, I think, is scripting the swims, the bikes, and the runs just on a day-to-day basis. Where David really comes in with the masterful art and science of coaching is more kind of the overarching aspects of training, like periodization, like season planning, things like nutrition, sports psychology. He's really helped me out a lot in that regard, less just the day-to-day details, although he will be, giving me feedback on every single workout I do and giving me input on what workouts I should be doing in a given block. So in terms of the structure of this block, it wasn't anything too radical. We didn't really do like a 3-to-1 approach. I considered that at first. The approach I took, though, is actually, to an external observer, I think it would look a little bit like flying by the seat of my pants, because I have a rough framework for a typical week, some key sessions I want to accomplish within the week, but I don't script it out as tightly as what day I'm going to do those sessions on. So basically every single day I'm waking up and kind of assessing how fatigue levels are, what my mental state is, and trying to get the most out of myself on each day. And that absolutely does not mean smashing it, going as hard as I can every day. In fact, quite the opposite. I think a certain type of athlete like me is, too good at just burying myself. And that's really the hard part, is knowing when to rest and when to back off. So part of being in touch with yourself, I think, is knowing when to take those easier days. And that's when David really comes in with a lot of helpful reality checking. So to answer your question, yes, I have a kind of a broader framework for the block, but every day I'm making adjustments based on how I'm feeling to get the most out of myself.
Wow. So going into this race, you're training 20-something hours a week normally. What was your longest swim, bike, and run workouts?
So my longest swim was about 5K, and that's pretty typical. I'll do 5K swims every single month of the year, basically. Swam as long as 11K in the past. That was a real outlier. Usually it's, some 6K swims over the winter, more consistently 5K swims over the season. My longest rides were 6 hours. Those are pretty much my longest rides ever. I did 3 6-hour rides and a whole ton of 4 to 5 hour rides. And that was a real departure from 70.3 training. With 70.3, I like that I can be quite a strong cyclist just riding 3 hours a week and rarely 4. I don't particularly enjoy these long rides. But in David's experience, whenever he has athletes do a few, or let's say 3 6-hour rides, it just results in some profound changes, maybe psychologically, physiologically, in terms of nutrition processing and stuff. And I certainly found it to be the case. So those weren't just like, zone 1 easy rides outside. Those were on the trainer holding kind of mid zone 2, let's say 230 watts, just steady quality work, aerobic work indoors, and not particularly fun. Not too keen to repeat those, but I definitely think they were really helpful. My longest running, I actually ended up running a standalone marathon about 3 weeks before Tremblant. And I actually did it on the treadmill just for a little bit more precise pacing control, a little bit more forgiving on the legs. And also it's a bit of a psychological crutch too. It was the kind of workout that would have been just really required a ton of focus to do outside, just basically a gradually building pyramid kind of workout. So it wasn't totally intentional to run the marathon. I rolled through about 40K, finishing the main interval set, and realized, hey, I can run 8 more minutes basically and go through the marathon and put on Instagram for the likes.
Wow.
So, and then I did some other 50K run days in the block, and that would be typically split as a 35K morning run on the treadmill with some quality, and then 15K afternoon easy trails usually.
Wow. Are you doing a lot of bricks in training?
In 70.3 training, I almost never do bricks. And I should qualify that by saying when you're a professional like me who focuses on 70.3, you're racing a lot. Like there's been seasons where I've raced like 10 70.3s. So those are all effectively brick workouts. And that's one of the reasons I don't need to do a lot of bricks in training. Typically it would just be like 1 or 2 leading into my first race of the season, and then almost none during the season, unless I have a day where I'm a bit time crunched and it just needs to be workouts back to back out of necessity. In this block, I definitely did some brick workouts that were kind of key sessions. So typically it would be on Saturday, a 4-hour ride with a 1-hour run off the bike. And I often did those with my good buddy, Jack Laundrie. He's kind of my main training partner here in Guelph. He just won his first 70.3. So he's been on a pretty awesome trajectory, and he's a really phenomenal training partner. So we'd go out and smash each other on the bike, and then often do an easy run off the bike. But then the last few weeks on my own, I actually did some quality interval work off the bike for about an hour. Let's say 10K of interval work and another 5 or so K, 6K easier. And so those were pretty big sessions that were almost like a race simulation that would leave me pretty tired the next day, but were definitely helpful.
Wow. Now, I remember you posting a video that you were doing on the trainer, that you're doing like 5+ hours on the trainer. What kind of trainer are you using?
Great question. So I work with a company called Stack Performance, and they're actually based really close to me in New Hamburg, Ontario, about an hour's drive. And they make a trainer called the Stack Zero Halcyon, which is their newly released smart trainer. So their first product was just a regular, I don't want to call it a dumb trainer, but you know what I mean, a regular trainer. Then they released a power measuring trainer. And then just this spring, they launched a smart trainer. So that replaced my old CompuTrainer. And I really consider, if you're going to do a lot of serious indoor training, a smart trainer is a totally necessary tool. I use erg mode a fair bit, not always. Again, like the treadmill, I think erg mode's a bit of a crutch. But just being able to precisely control resistance and being able to stay in your highest gear to maximize inertia, which gives you a lot more of a road-like feel, that's really important to me. So it's a tool that I use for almost all my rides. I basically just rode outside 1 day per week for my long brick in this block.
Wow. That's pretty awesome. Now, I don't know what it's like in Canada to actually go through outdoor rides, but I know down here in America, it's not really so safe anymore to ride outside. Is it the same way up there?
It's not bad, actually. I live in a really good area for riding outside. I live in sort of a medium-sized city of a little over 100,000, maybe pushing 200,000 now, Guelph, Ontario. And I can get outside, be out in the country in about 10 minutes. And there's some pretty good quiet roads. There's some paved shoulders, which makes a big difference. If I take my cross bike out, which I haven't been lately, but I've used a lot in the past, that has like 32 millimeter slick tires on it. And that opens up this whole wonderful world of gravel grinding and, dirt back roads and rail trails and stuff. So that's pretty good. But I hear you on the safety consideration. That's kind of the main reason I ride the trainer. It's a great tool for precision and time efficiency, but it's also about safety. Like when I'm out on my Ventum triathlon bike, I'm just going so fast. I'm not visible to the cars. They're not expecting me to be traveling that fast. I can't see particularly well because my position's so low. So there's just a lot of risk factors. Your hands are off the brakes too. I consider that bike and that position and that setup I have on it, that's kind of for race day basically. And it's not something I like to take out too often on busy roads. I've ridden all over North America, and here in Guelph, definitely some of the safest and best riding. But I've had a number of friends have really bad accidents. Like I just raced, Matt Russell was just third in IRONMAN Mont Tremblant after one hell of a comeback over the past year after a terrible, horrific accident last year during the race in Kona. A car basically took him out. I think T-boned him during the race. So you can control pretty much everything, and then you're still kind of at risk of being hit by an errant driver like that. And there's been a lot of cases where pros have been hit. So I think if you're going to be out riding, 12 hours a week, you're just playing the odds that sooner or later you're going to have a nasty encounter with a car. So I try and mitigate that as much as possible by being on the trainer, just getting outside as little as possible to acclimate and get the necessary work done.
Wow. So a little bit more about your bike ride. Being that you're going to be spending 12 to 15 hours a week on your bike, how do you stay comfortable on the bike so much?
Just to correct that, I wouldn't actually be doing 15 hours. I know a lot of pros are up around that point. I was pretty consistently, I think the biggest week was 13.
Oh, okay.
And this block was on the high side for me, like being, let's say an average of 12 hours in the middle of the block. Most of my 70.3 training, I think all winter, I probably averaged 7 hours a week on the bike. Just a heck of a lot of quality, So typically not too much longer than that.
Okay. So how are you staying comfortable on the bike?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've done a lot of work with bike fitting and stuff, and I've usually fit myself. I've had a couple professional fits, but for the most part, aerodynamics are guiding my fits. So in the past, I had a couple opportunities with Ventum to go down to the faster wind tunnel and do some wind tunnel testing. But what's been really helpful for the past few years is, again, working with Stack Performance. Besides their trainer, one of the other services they offer is virtual wind tunnel testing. So it's this really cool new technology that combines 3D scanning, like the same technology like an Xbox Kinect scanner might use for gaming or something, to create a virtual model basically of the athlete and the bike and the equipment. And then the next step is computational fluid dynamics, which is using really high-end, high computing power to run aerodynamic simulations. So it has some limitations, but it's almost as good as actual wind tunnel testing. And in fact, my numbers from the real world wind tunnel jive really well with the numbers from these simulations. So what this allows me to do is I go back every few months and test some equipment and position changes. So my fit has been a lot less guided by comfort than aerodynamics. Aerodynamics are first and foremost, and then I take those results, go out and validate them on the road. Sometimes I've made changes where I go, that's not going to be comfortable at all. It's really stupid fast, but it's just not going to be sustainable for 4.5 hours for an Ironman ride. So I'm comfortable on the Ventum for sure. It's a comfortable bike. I've paid attention to contact points like my arm pads and my shoes and my saddle and stuff. But aerodynamics really, really drive the fit, and comfort is secondary. I know a lot of people watching the coverage, which was really awesome, of this race on the new Ironman Now Facebook Live show. They commented I was kind of all over the place in the bike and scooting back and forth in the saddle. And maybe that sort of reflects the fact that the fit's pretty aggressive and very aerodynamic, but not necessarily as comfortable as it could be.
Wow. Now, when you're on the bike for this long, do you have low back pain or any pain anywhere?
There have been times when I've had some lower back tightness. I've kind of mitigated that a little bit by going to shorter cranks and also paying attention to my posture on the bike. So not just contact points, but how you actually sit on the bike has some pretty deep repercussions for how your back and rest of your muscles are going to feel after several hours on the bike. So just kind of adopting a natural shoulder shrug, keeping my head low and turtled in a sort of a neutral position. That I find really helps with keeping the back loose. But definitely towards the end of an Ironman ride or those 6-hour rides, my back's getting a little bit tight. And I found earlier when I was only doing 3-hour rides for 70.3 training, the fourth hour, occasionally when I ride that long, would be pretty uncomfortable. But having done these longer rides in this block, you definitely get used to it. I think you build up some more core strength and stabilize your muscle strength, and it's not so bad.
That makes sense. So going into this race, you did a lot of volume, it seems like, in comparison to most of the age groupers, obviously. But what workouts did you do that gave you the confidence to go into this race as your first Ironman prepared, and not just prepared, but to have a solid performance that you wanted?
In the past, when I was more self-coached, I would look at my training and I'd feel great about doing these really epic sessions that look great to post on Strava, on social media or whatever. And, they just weren't really conducive to consistency. So I'd do an epic session, then I'd be exhausted for a few days after it. So I'd just be doing 1 or 2 of these great sessions a week and not a whole lot else. This block, and since I've been working with David over the last few years, we've taken a different tact where it's not about, no one workout is really spectacular. It's just about consistent quality days that you can string together day after day without a huge impact where you just get too exhausted to train or too unfocused to train for a while. So this block, that's a long preamble to say there wasn't any one workout that I would say that was just utterly spectacular. Some of those 5-hour bricks were pretty solid, like we'd do 3 hours around 230 watts, last hour up around 280, or even 2 hours of work at 280, and straight into some pretty fast running. Like I rolled through a 5K in 17 minutes and change, and 10K in 35 minutes. So, well above Ironman pace in the 5th hour of a workout, basically. So that's some pretty quality stuff. The treadmill marathon was I went through in 2:45. I would never, ever equate a treadmill marathon, even after a hard swim, to an Ironman marathon. But that was something. And what made that confidence inspiring for me was that not the fact that I did it, but the fact that it wasn't really a huge deal. Like I trained the day after, I trained the day before. didn't blow a huge hole in my training. It was just kind of another run day. Same with those 50K run days and those 6-hour bike rides. So nothing totally spectacular. I never felt the need to go out and do an 8-hour race simulation or something like that to really bolster my confidence.
Wow. So you're really giving stock for your confidence in the consistency versus the 1 or 2 big key workouts.
Exactly. And of course, that leaves you with some question marks, like what's going to happen with nutrition and other factors after 6, 7, 8 hours of racing. But, I raced to answer those questions. I didn't feel the need to test that out in training. It's all about consistency for me.
Right. So you mentioned nutrition. What kind of nutrition were you going to be using for this race?
That's a good question. So I basically took my 70.3 approach over the last few years and just made some subtle adjustments to that. So I don't currently have any relationship with a sports nutrition company, which is important to say up front, I think. So that kind of left me to do a lot of my own research and pursue what I thought was the most scientifically validated approach. I consulted a lot of people too. Pamela Nietzsche-Bede she formerly worked for EAS and now she's doing private dietitian consulting. So she was really helpful. I talked to my good friend, Matt Hansen, North American Ironman champion. Of course, my coach, David Tilbury Davis, has a forte with nutrition. And so I talked to all these people, did a lot of testing and research on my own, read a lot of journal articles. And what I arrived at was actually mixing my own blend because I wasn't totally enamored with anything that was commercially available. So I bought bulk maltodextrin, bulk fructose, and some amylopectin. So those are 3 different carbohydrates. They're all metabolized at different rates and a little bit differently through different pathways. And the idea is you can kind of max out one pathway and your body gets overwhelmed processing, say, fructose, but you can still be absorbing the maltodextrin. So it's this theory of multiple transportable carbohydrates, and there's a lot of great literature on that going back over the last decade. So the blend I mixed was a 2-to-1-to-1 ratio of maltodextrin to fructose to amylopectin. And then to that, I added a little bit of electrolytes from F2C, Canadian company, and I flavored it with some Red Bull. Now, I don't think Red Bull is any kind of rocket fuel. I think it's just it's some sugars, it's about 80 milligrams of caffeine a can, and taurine, their kind of secret sauce ingredient, doesn't really seem to impact me like a stimulant. I don't really think it does anything for me personally. So that was what I used for most of the ride, and I had a flask of that on the run. I also mixed in one of my bottles some F2C glycodurance. It's a good product. They use cyclic dextrin, which is similar to maltodextrin, but probably superior. So I really like what they're doing, and they gave me some product to test out, and I liked it enough to include it in my plan. So that's a company I'd love to talk to more. I think they're doing some good work. But generally, I think the nutrition for the Ironman for me was one of my biggest positive take-homes from the day. Like I was saying, you can only really test things to an extent, and I definitely rehearse with nutrition a lot in training. That's a really important thing to practice and to train your gut. But you just can't know exactly what's going to happen after 6, 7, 8 hours. So I was able to average about 450 calories or well over 100 grams of carbs every single hour of the race. In fact, the first hour of the ride, I think I had about 700 calories.
Wow.
A whole bottle that I mixed on just the first hour of the bike. And I kind of had to tell myself to slow down because even if you're a freak when it comes to carb absorption, no one's going to be handling quite that much without some issues.
Right. Now, to kind of back up a little bit with all of your training, you're training quite a bit. Now, whenever you're not training or racing or traveling to races, what do you have on your plate?
So obviously as a professional triathlete, your whole life is built around this. Like training 20 to 25 hours is not equivalent to sitting at a desk working for 20 to 25 hours. Just all the peripheral incidental stuff that goes into supporting that, the amount of extra meal prep and eating time, the amount of extra sleep, I have to nap every day, transportation to and from workouts, that 20 to 25 hours is strictly moving time. So once you take into account everything else, that looks a lot more like easily double that, say 40 to 50 hour actual week in terms of training and just incidental related things. You add to that all the sponsor commitments. So that's typically, an appearance or so every other week and lots of emails and correspondence and social media. So that adds easily another 10 to 20 hours a week. Doesn't really leave me with a whole lot of other time. Triathlon is a job that really impacts your life 24/7. It's not something where you can hang up your coat and hat at the end of the day and be at home and just chill. Basically every decision you make impacts your triathlon career. That said, I think it's really important to have some interest outside of triathlon. So I've gone through periods where I've just immersed myself completely in the sport, and it might be all well and good for a finite period of time, but it's just not sustainable for me and most people, I think. So just had my piano moved into my new house. I'm working on brushing up on my piano skills again. Love to read a lot. Definitely like to hang out with friends and family, and have lots of triathlete friends. And, I love them dearly, but I particularly like to have some friends that aren't necessarily triathletes, just to kind of forcibly unplug me from the triathlon community a little bit.
Wow. What kind of piano do you have?
I've got a Yamaha upright, and it's badly in need of being tuned right now. So I'm not going to play anything.
Wow. So you obviously did not know this about me, but I have spent 15 years of my life rebuilding and working on pianos. So,
no way.
Yes, that was what I grew up doing. My dad is
so cool.
Second generation piano technician. He's an RPT of more than 35 years. And my brother and I, we grew up around pianos, and we both worked on pianos. I've rebuilt pianos. I mean, it's crazy. But when you say piano, it's like, oh, I know this.
That's so cool. I have such respect for piano builders and repairmen and stuff, because I actually worked at a piano shop throughout my time in high school.
Wow.
So there was kind of the premier Yamaha repair shop in Canada. Like, they would have piano shipped in from Roy Thompson Hall, like the biggest concert hall in Toronto, and piano shipped from across the country, like $100,000 concert grands and stuff, Steinways as well. And so I didn't get to work on those really expensive pianos for the most part, but I got to tinker around with all kinds of other pianos and really have just so much respect for all the different trades that combines. There's metalwork, there's extremely fine carpentry, like carpentry to a level it makes cabinet making look like child's play,
Yes.
And my favorite part about that job, though, is that after these $100,000 grand pianos would get broken in, like 10-foot grands and stuff, after they get worked on, they had to get broken in before they could be shipped back to the concert hall. So I literally got paid to sit in this empty shop at night and hammer away on these beautiful instruments just to kind of get them broken in again.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's pretty cool. Yeah.
Wow. So whenever you're training all these hours, you have all these time commitments and all of this going on in your life. With training, were there any days where you just didn't really want to train?
Oh, absolutely. That's every single week. There is at least a day I really don't want to train.
Really?
I think for the most part, it's one hell of a grind, in training. I think that if you can genuinely enjoy about half your training and be totally in the zone, just in that state of flow and totally elated with 5% of it, you're doing pretty well. And that leaves a solid half of my training where I'm really not feeling it. I'm just tired or unfocused or want to be somewhere else or distracted. So, yeah, for sure. But after several years in the sport at, the world-class level, I can say that it's worth it to me. It's worth suffering through 10 to 15 hours a week I don't particularly enjoy for the stuff that I do really enjoy. And it's not all about just the validation of racing to me. The financial rewards certainly aren't what's making it worthwhile. So I genuinely love the process, and the tough days are part of that process too. So, they make the good days feel that much better.
Right. Now, as far as transitioning a little bit to the actual race here, what was your taper like going into this? Did you have the traditional 3-week taper, or what was your taper like?
It certainly wasn't a 3-week taper. It was on the longer side for me because I just never done this long of a block before, basically 8 weeks of my heaviest training ever. So I would say about 2 weeks out, I stopped really pushing through anything truly miserable and just kind of listened to my body a little bit more, was a little bit more gentle with myself, not really any brutal workouts or anything like that. 8 days out, I actually still did a pretty significant workout. Went out with my friend Mike Hay and rode 2.5 hours with about an hour at 300 watts or so above Ironman power. And then straight into a run where I did 5x2K, well above Ironman pace, closer to 10K pace, in fact. So pretty solid day, and took the next day totally off. But that was only basically a week out from the race. Even race week, very little biking and running, just lower volume, like a quarter of the volume, or maybe not a quarter, but let's say half the volume to a third. Still with some high-end intensity though. And in the water, I really kept up some quality swimming. So I swim with Guelph Triathlon Project, a local ITU focused squad. And Craig Taylor, the coach there, I did some pretty tough workouts with them. Like we did 40 by 25 meter sprints about 4 days out from the race. And that really sharpened up my top end speed, I think, for the race.
Wow. Now, going into the race, when did you actually start traveling to the race?
Yeah, so I've raced in Mont Tremblant several times now. I've been going there since I was a little kid to cross country and downhill ski with my family, mountain biked around there too when I was a kid. And over the last few years, I raced the 5150 and then the 70.3 the last 3 years. So there's no surprises about the course. The Ironman's just twice through the 70.3 course, basically. I didn't feel the need to go out for this long, period of acclimation or anything like that, or to tour around the course. I only went out, drove myself out on Thursday, I believe, and just had Friday to take care of race stuff, Saturday to chill, and Sunday to race.
Okay, so pretty simple.
Yeah, I've never been one to arrive at races really early. In fact, my first time racing in Asia earlier this year at 70.3 Taiwan, which I ended up winning, I only rolled into the race site like Friday night, I think, and had Saturday to figure out what the heck I was doing, and then race Sunday before my body even realized I was jet lagged, I think.
Wow.
So in my experience, the longer you spend in destinations, the higher the chances something's going to go wrong. You're training in an unfamiliar place. It's hard to get workouts done. Swimming is often a big problem. Knowing safe roads can be tricky. Tremblant is a premier training destination, so that's not as much of an issue there. But especially if you're in less developed countries, just the food and the infrastructure, everything is riskier and potentially going to mess up your race. So I'd rather just travel late. The only trade-off is if you're flying, there's always the risk your bike won't make a connection or get lost or something. And I've had bikes show up mere hours before races, which is not exactly relaxing, but you roll with it.
Right. So you drove to this race. To kind of put this in the human perspective, what is your go-to travel food when you're driving on road trips?
Oh, I had a bunch of stuff. Got to give a shout out to Martin's apple chips, of course. They're the flagship product of Martin's Family Fruit Farm, a local apple orchard I work with. So they're these dehydrated, crunchy apple chips, really nutritious, really good. I've always got a whole bag of those in my car. So those are always a staple. Oh, I had some dark chocolate. I had some nuts and raisins. I had, it's like a buffet when I'm driving. It's ridiculous. I just filled on my own. I just filled a passenger seat with a cooler, and I think I made a burrito too. Lots of food. Definitely didn't go hungry leading into the race.
Wow. So do you listen to music while you're driving? What are you listening to?
I actually was listening to a whole bunch of podcasts. I didn't listen to any music this drive like I've done in the past. I've been really hooked on podcasts lately, and I hate to say it to your listeners, not so much triathlon podcasts, surprisingly. I love triathlon podcasts. I listen to them some, but like I was saying, triathlon dominates my life so much already. I'm not super inclined to spend my limited kind of entertainment hours consuming more triathlon media a lot of the time. So I like kind of broadening my knowledge in other spheres. I've really been enjoying How Stuff Works, kind of a silly but informative podcast where two guys just banter about various topics, and Freakonomics is always really well done. There's a lot of good ones I've been listening to.
Wow. So whenever you get to Mont Tremblant, do you have an Airbnb or a hotel that you're going to?
In Tremblant, the homestay program there is fantastic. Really just reflects the whole community is so behind the race. There's like as many racers as volunteers out on the course, pretty much. So or even more volunteers, I think. So it's just phenomenal in that regard. And the homestay program there is really good. Over the last few years, I've had some of my best homestays in the sport, and homestays are always just a highlight of my professional triathlon experience. So I've made some very dear friends there, and I'm always well taken care of.
Nice. So you get to your homestay, you get your bike out, you're going through your bike, making sure it made it through the journey safely and all that. And you go to the pro meeting the day after. How was all the pro meeting and all this fun stuff?
Yeah, I was pretty nervous leading into the race. So time was kind of flowing strangely, in leaps and spurts and stuff. It just the day seemed to go by really quickly, a little too quickly. But it was busy, like I was invited to the pro panel. And so that's never exactly relaxing to be in front of a whole bunch of people talking, which I don't mind, but just, sitting next to Lionel Sanders and scoping out the competition and stuff. So pro panel, then pro briefing, and then some other little sponsor appearances at the expo. And of course my taper workouts. And then Saturday, I really made an effort to put my feet up a little bit more. I dropped my bike off, and I just did a little run in the morning. I had a swim plan too. I really liked to swim the day before, but I just kind of called an audible and got to the lake and decided I wasn't going to swim, turned around, went home, had a great nap, and ate a bunch of food instead. And I think it was the right decision.
Wow. So as far as the process of getting all of your swag for this race, it's pretty normal.
Yeah, it went really smoothly, and like I said about Tremblant, I know the village like the back of my hand. There's just no surprises there.
Wow. So the day before the race, are you trying to get in a certain meal plan of how you want to consume nutrition the day before to prep you for the race? What does this look like?
No, not at all. I think Absolutely not. No, some athletes I've stayed with a lot of athletes. I like to travel with athletes and stuff. And some people are just so damn weird about what they do the day before a race. And it's like, I've trained with these people day in, day out. They put up great sessions when they're just doing whatever they normally do. And then the day before the race, they decide they have to have a certain brand of rice cooked for X minutes with so-and-so side dish or whatever. It's like this really, I think it's just crazy. So I really try and, the reason I really reject all these rituals and routines is that inevitably at some point in your career, they're going to get disturbed. Something's going to go wrong, whether it's food or something else. And you're going to be off your game as a result. And if that really freaks you out because you feel like you have to be wearing your lucky socks and eating your lucky food or whatever, that's going to be a problem. So I deliberately do not try and adopt any rituals and routines and just go with the flow a little bit. So the day before the race, I pretty much just ate my normal diet. Last minute, my homestay was kind of like, hey, I'm making dinner for everyone. Are you down? And I said, of course. And I usually eat vegetarian. And that night I had a bunch of chicken and fish and stuff, which is awesome. So I really don't care too much about that. Same goes for race day breakfast. I'll have a pretty wide variety of foods. When I was in Taiwan racing the 70.3 there, they were treating us to all kinds of local cuisine. So like I was eating things with, eyes and antenna basically the day before the race.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I just try and be flexible about it. The one change I would make a little bit, I think, is for a really hot race, I might try and salt load a little bit. I think there's some credence to that. Just trying to introduce a little bit more sodium because my diet isn't particularly high sodium for the most part. Tremblant wasn't really hot or anything, so I didn't feel the need to add any more electrolytes. And yeah, of course, you're just staying hydrated and stuff too. And I think the most important thing is not what you're eating, but making sure you're eating a lot and a lot of carbs just so you're totally topped up for the race.
Okay. Now, the day before the race, you're able to check your bike in the morning of the race. So you're going through all of your equipment. I know you have the Ventum bike and you're laying out all of your gear there and putting your stickers on. What does all this look like for you?
Yeah, race morning was not bad for me. Typically for 70.3 races lately, I've been sleeping like so well, like better than I sleep at home. I don't understand. I've been almost too calm. I was definitely not too calm for this race. I think I was pretty nervous, but there's an optimal level of nervousness. So it definitely tossed and turned a bit at night and didn't get much sleep, maybe only a few hours. But I know that's pretty irrelevant from experience. So race morning got up. I'd already checked my bike in the day before, which is something pros don't have to do, but I just, it was one less thing to worry about basically. And my homestay very graciously drove me to the race start, which is awesome because Tremblant, as much as I love it, is a bit of the parking there is a little bit difficult. You're kind of stuck there all day if you park, basically. You can't escape. So I got there and was one of the first pros in transition, which I like. Had a lot of time to just leisurely lay out my stuff, Skechers shoes, Ventum bike, Alto wheels, Pioneer Power, make sure that was all dialed in, got the power meter paired up and working as usual. And then what I like to do is just put on my headphones, and I work with a Bluetooth audio company called Blick that just released a great high-end set of headphones. And so just plugged into those for a little while and chilled and listened to some music. Got myself pumped up with gradually more intense songs as I was walking over to the swim start. And by the time I was there, I was ready to go. But of course, as you already mentioned, we had an hour delay in 15-minute increments. So I was pumped up a little bit too early.
Wow. So that just went through it all. Now, are you doing a flying mount here with your shoes already on the bike? What does this look like?
That's right. Yeah. So my shoes will already be clipped in, and I actually switched shoes for this race. I don't have any shoe sponsor, by the way. I've used a lot of different shoes over the years. I bought some Shimano road shoes. They're I think RC7 shoes. Not even their top end shoes. And they have one BOA dial, and I just cut the tongues out, which I've done before. And it makes them into a great dry shoe. Like I've used some other road shoes too, where if you can cut the tongue out and there's not any kind of abrasive parts that are going to give you blisters, I actually prefer road shoes to tri-specific shoes for the most part. I don't really see a big need for tri shoes. And I like the BOA dial because I can kind of make adjustments on the fly really easily because my feet tend to swell a little bit over the course of a ride and can get pretty uncomfortable if they're just velcroed into one position. So I had those clipped into my bike, elastic bands supporting them so they're staying horizontal. And then my flying mount isn't really on point. I mentioned I train with all these ITU guys that would probably do circles around me in transition, but I can kind of stomp on one foot and swing on one shoe and then swing my leg over the bike. And it's pretty quick. It suffices for long course, and it's not as dangerous as a true flying mount where you're basically diving onto the bike. Right.
Now for this bike course, you're using 95 and 90 PSI, right?
Yeah, that's right. But 95 rear. and 90 front. And that's kind of my default. The Tremblant roads are quite good. I might go a little bit higher if I was on like just silky smooth roads. And I would go significantly lower if it was rainy, like 5 to even 10 PSI lower if it was rainy or if the roads were awful. So I think a lot of people are still stuck in the past with really high PSI numbers. And it just isn't comfortable. It isn't good for traction. And the evidence is showing that kind of the optimum PSI range for a guy about my size and tires the width I'm using is right around that 90 to 95 mark.
Okay. Now, whenever you actually realize that the swim is going to be delayed a little bit, they put this out in 15-minute increments. So you're like, okay, 15 minutes, not that big of a deal. 2, okay, yep. Well, still, it's not really ideal. But then you get to the 3rd and then the 4th, you're like, oh my gosh. So is this raising your anxiety level? Are you worried about your nutrition plan? I mean, I saw y'all out there in Mylar blankets before the race.
Yeah, so I've had this happen in the past, specifically last year at 70.3 Santa Cruz. The swim was delayed by about the same amount, again, due to fog. And I really learned a lot from that experience. And here's the 3 key changes I make for every race now so that I'm ready for a delayed start, even if it doesn't look likely. I always will just do this. First, I'll bring down some extra nutrition. It might just be, a bottle with a few hundred extra calories that I can pitch if I don't need in the garbage, or a couple gels. And so in this case, I had a couple gels with me, and my homestay found me and gave me even another gel. So total homestay of the year award right there. Really awesome. The other change is, in this case, often when it's foggy like this, it's because the water is relatively warm. So for the pros, it was a non-wetsuit swim, just below the temperature cutoff. Wetsuit legal for age groupers, but they have a different cutoff. But the air was quite cool. I'm not very good with Fahrenheit, so you have to forgive me. Let's just say it was cool. So what I did is I wore a wetsuit down, even though it was a non-wetsuit swim. And this is a trick that ITU athletes use a lot. And in long course, I actually picked up from my friend Matt Charbot, who's a great swimmer, way better than me. So I warmed up in my wetsuit. Blue 70 gave me a great wetsuit to test out the new Helix, and didn't get to race in it, of course, but it kept me really warm during the warm up. And I was so grateful to have that wetsuit on when we were standing around for about an hour. And I only stripped it off about 10 minutes before our actual start, once they finalized it, and then quickly wrapped myself in a Mylar space blanket, which resulted in some pretty funny, like C-list kind of superhero pictures and stuff with me with this Mylar cape, which all the photographers were snapping up. But that was really, really helpful to stay warm. And the third change is less physical, but more just psychological. It's just about staying focused. I've seen this happen where when there's a delayed start, the pros start chatting and goofing around and joking and not staying warmed up and just getting unfocused. So I definitely stayed relaxed by chatting with some friends. There's a great picture of Lionel and I like cracking a joke or something and both laughing. Looks like we're definitely not about to start a race. Like, looks like we're just shooting the breeze or something at the bar. So I was relaxed, but my head was definitely still in the game. I was still thinking about the swim. I was still moving around, staying warmed up. I didn't let my attention wander too much because I know that other people weren't staying as razor focused. And I think that's one of the reasons I had one of the best swim starts, relatively speaking, in my career. Like, I was immediately right out with the front pack, which isn't always the case for me at all. And went really well in that regard. Wow.
So the gun goes off and you begin your race. How does the first few hundred meters of the swim go for you?
Back to 70.3 swims are fast. Like they're raced almost as fast as like an Olympic distance swim. So it goes out just stupidly fast, not sustainable at all, of course. And that's just the faster swimmers making an attempt to break away, which tactically makes sense because I'm the kind of swimmer, I'm decent. I can hang with almost anyone if I can draft them, but I just don't have that top end start speed. So these faster swimmers know they can break away from pretenders like me if they just put in a big burst of speed. So that's always how it happens. Ironman, I was kind of told it was the same thing. Everyone's like, oh, it's pretty much just a 70.3 swim times 2, crazy fast, given that you're going to be racing for 7 more hours after or more. So I had steeled myself for like just an all out sprint and then all kinds of surges during the race, which you often see in 70.3 in and out of every buoy. And, it just didn't deliver in that regard. Like, maybe it was because it was a bit of a shallower field. There were definitely some good swimmers there. But it was pretty mellow right from the start. Perhaps the delayed start also played into that a little bit. But right away, without what felt like a huge sprint, I found myself right with Joe Gambles and Andrew Yoder, who were two guys that I rarely swim in the same pack as because they're just better swimmers. And then Antoine Jolicoeur-Desroches, another Canadian Quebecois athlete who's a phenomenal swimmer. I didn't even see him go off the front, but that would be, dreamland to try and swim with that guy. He's just next level. But it was kind of best case scenario to be with Andrew and Joe. And so I just let them do the work and just bided my time behind them, drafting really comfortably. Around every turn buoy, I was totally prepared to surge and very situationally aware, which is something that I've worked on a lot. The squad I swim with, this ITU group Guelph Triathlon Project, the coach, Craig Taylor, has us do some open water swimming where we don't just kind of fool around in the middle of the lake, but actually set up a course with buoys and then do beach starts and practice turning. We've done swims around like a 400 meter or yard course with four or five turn buoys. So really working on those open water skills. And that was kind of a missing piece of the puzzle for me in terms of transferring pool swimming to open water swimming and race situations. And then towards the end of the swim, the water got shallow enough to dolphin dive, which I was prepared for. And I'm not a great swimmer, but like my dolphin diving is pretty on point, if I do say so myself. So I just kind of popped around them doing dolphin dives and was second out of the water.
Wow. Now, whenever you actually got done with the swim, or let's say the last, 400 meters of the swim, are you doing anything in the water to kind of get ready to start running out? Are you making sure you're sighting correctly or anything like that? I mean, that's an obvious, but do you have like a strategy of how you want to get out of the water?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the changes I made over the last few years is gradually switching almost exclusively to a 2-beat kick. And for those of your listeners that aren't super familiar, that's 2 kicks for every stroke cycle. So basically 1 kick for every pull you take. And it looks it looks like you're barely kicking at all, just enough to keep your legs floating. And that's pretty much the case. All your propulsion's coming from your arms almost. And it feels really cruisy. And for me, as I've gotten better at it and more practiced, it's become really, really efficient. So I've got my really cruisy 2-beat kick that I can swim at up until about threshold pace. And then above threshold pace, it makes sense for me to switch to the more normal 6-beat kick, which is what most people default to naturally and what most people learn in swim lessons and stuff. And that's, the more splashy kick and more powerful. So I'll actually use a 6-beat kick for the swim start, and I'll use a 6-beat kick for any surges to kind of answer any attacks during the swim. And then I'll also switch back from that 2-beat to 6-beat kick towards the end of the swim finish, simply to get a bit more blood flowing to my legs, kind of wake my legs up, especially for this race. The water was chilly enough that without a wetsuit, my toes were going a little bit numb towards the end.
Really?
And I figured my legs wouldn't be totally woken up. So switched to a 6-beat kick for about the last 300-400 meters and was ready to run pretty fast right out of the water, because I know there's almost a kilometer-long run, say half a mile, to the transition tent in Mont Tremblant.
Wow. So how did T1 go for you?
T1 went really smoothly. I took everything I've learned about 70.3 racing, and 70.3 is looking more and more like ITU racing. You just can't afford to waste like even 10 extra seconds in transition. And T1 is really of high tactical importance to me, because I'm often coming out of the water towards the back of a swim pack, or with guys I want to drop on the bike. So I know with a fast T1, I can make up a lot of ground right away. So I really hammered that run up to T1, probably faster than my marathon pace later on, significantly, and quickly threw on some socks. The only thing I do differently than 70.3, put on my helmet in the transition tent and ran the rest of the way through, hopped on my bike with my shoes already clipped in, like I said, and was ready to go. So I think it was actually one of the fastest transitions on the day.
Wow. So you get out on the bike ride. Do you have a certain power number, cadence number, RPE? What are you going off of to make sure that you're doing what you need to be doing for this course?
So it's a combination of perceived exertion and definitely reality checked through power targets that are determined in advance. Definitely no cadence, no heart rate on the bike. Don't even show those on my monitor. So the numbers I'm looking at for my Pioneer Power Meter, before the race, I'd done enough long workouts to kind of determine that I thought about 270 watts average power and about 280 watts normalized power would be a pretty reasonable target. There's always a bit of a window, say plus or minus 5-10 watts. And for the first lap of the bike course, the first half, that proved to be about spot on. I was putting time into everyone except Lionel holding those power numbers, felt pretty good. And then quite abruptly, things started to come unraveled a little bit. And the second lap was a pretty significant positive split. So people say like, oh, Cody, you nailed the ride, you set a bike course record, but maybe some amount of fading is inevitable in an Ironman, but I saw a little more than I'd like. So I was right on those numbers over the first part of the hilly ride. And then the second lap, which is identical, definitely faded by about 15-20 watts. So that's pretty significant and something I want to kind of work on a little bit. Maybe it's just a matter of going 5 watts lower in the first lap or something. But you can't really know those pacing numbers until you test it out in racing.
Right. Now, with this road and this course, it's pretty smooth. There's really a few do not pass zones, obviously, but there's a lot of hills. and they're not really hills, they're mountains, obviously. But do you have a way of how you want to attack this from a cadence or perspective of going into this mentally?
Yeah, there's a lot I could say about that. So I gave you my kind of average and normalized power targets, but obviously on a course with this much variability in terms of terrain, your power is going to fluctuate a lot. So it's actually, believe it or not the most efficient way to just hold completely steady power numbers. So I'd never try and do that. It's advantageous from a speed standpoint to actually go a little bit higher up on the climbs and a little bit lower on the descents in terms of power, which we intuitively grasp. But sometimes you hear, oh, it's most efficient and you'll run best to just hold totally steady power. Not necessarily true. So on some of these really sharp, steep climbs, I'd go as high as 400 watts for 30 seconds or maybe even a minute or something, and definitely well over 300 on some of the other climbs. So there's kind of two significant climbs per lap. There's a short, moderately steep one out on the main highway. And then the really significant part that most people, if there's anything that really haunts their dreams about this race, it's the section called Chemin du Plessis. And it's about a 10K climb and 10K descent at the end of each lap. And it's not really just a straight climb. Like it's rollers that gradually go up and then rollers that gradually go down. So you work your butt off on the 10K climbing, and then you don't really get what feels like a great rest going down. There's sections where you'll hit 70, 80, maybe even 90 kilometers an hour, but there's also punchy rollers you're coming up again. So, some pretty variable power there, and the power file looks quite steady out on the main highway and then all over the map when you look at that Chemin du Plessis section.
Wow. Now, for your nutrition plan, was this going according to what you wanted to do? You said that you consumed a lot more than normal of what you wanted on the first hour. Was this holding true?
Yeah, so I've kind of long suspected that I'm an outlier when it comes to nutrition, and specifically like carb oxidation rates, like how many carbs I can process an hour. So I'd already kind of put together a nutrition plan that was on the high side. So I started the bike with 1,800 calories. I had about a 700 calorie bottle up front, all carbs, that blend I mentioned, and another 700 calorie bottle behind my saddle, smaller bottle, and then about 400 calories in my integrated Ventum bottle, which is really awesome. So I burned through all those, and I realized I was going to be going through them at a faster rate, and actually picked up a bottle of Gatorade and picked up a gel too. So total for the bike was well over 2,000 calories.
Wow.
And that's, if you do the math on that for a ride that was, I think, 4 hours and 24 minutes or something, you're looking at north of 450 calories an hour, basically. So that's definitely makes me quite an outlier with respect to nutrition. I think most people that tried to push that would probably find themselves with some porta potty stops in the run or some other GI distress.
Right. That makes sense. Now, whenever you start getting towards the later portion of the bike ride, 70, 80, 90 miles, or in your case, what would that be, 130, 140, 150K?
There you go. Not bad for a Dallas guy.
Yeah, I know, right? So are you entering any of the bad spots mentally?
Yeah, I would say that actually the lowest point of the whole race was the last quarter of the ride. And looking back, I'm not sure. It just shows you don't really get rational when you're getting tired, because if I'd been really thinking about it rationally, I was putting time into everyone on the course. So Lionel had been chipping away at my lead all day. And then I could tell at the last turnaround, I'd put like minutes into him over this climb on Chemin du Plessis. So clearly I was fading, but everyone else was fading even worse. So I should have kind of taken some confidence from that. But my headspace was pretty negative then. So coming off the bike, I came off the bike with a huge lead and just like these roaring crowds in Tremblant, tons of people, a huge video screen with me on it and stuff, and cameras all over me. It should have been like the most thrilling experience, but my head I was in such a low point that I'm like, oh, I'm just going to be walking this marathon. Might as well drop out at this point. And I've never had like a breakthrough performance at the limit of my abilities where I haven't entertained the notion of dropping out at some point. I think that's the kind of negotiating that a lot of us go through in races. But of course, the idea after the fact is just absurd. Like, when has a winner of a race that's ever set a bike course record dropped out of a race? And leading into the race, I've had a lot of, coaching and work with my coach on sports psychology. And it's something I've come a long way with in my career, I think. So I had these methods and stuff to help banish that negativity. And once I got out on the run, I found myself in a much better headspace. After the first few K, I loosened up a little bit, and I realized it wasn't going to be nearly as bad as I expected, and started to feel a lot more confident. So of that whole 8+ hour day, really the low point was just a half-hour window towards the end of the ride.
Wow. So how do you get past these mental headspaces of where it's all negative?
So we've used some different methods over the years. One I really like is kind of power phrases. So they're just a string of a few words that might be meaningless to anyone but you, and they can serve as everything from like technical cues to different techniques to banish negativity or to remind you about a positive experience in the past, really anything. So I like to write down a few kind of key phrases before a race. That's a good technique. Another one is just I usually like to kind of be present and really engaging with whatever pain I'm feeling, whatever feelings. I know guys like Mac have talked about having a conversation with the pain, greeting it like an old friend, and that kind of speaks to me. But equally, sometimes you just have to dissociate almost. So I'll visualize that I'm like almost floating above, watching my body, not totally detached from whatever pain I'm feeling, whatever emotions, just clinically observing basically. Or, you know, at the worst, maybe I'll pretend that I'm just somewhere else, somewhere peaceful, far away, draw on a past memory. Like I toured an ice cave in Austria a few years ago, and it was just this wonderfully cool, calm, quiet place. So sometimes I'll take myself there when I'm really suffering, especially on a hot day. And I think that's a pretty powerful technique as well. And you have to feel ferocious too. I mean, it's easy to feel like prey, I guess, when you're at the front of the race being chased down. But you know, like passing Lionel each turnaround, I looked straight into his eyes and gave me a big surge of adrenaline. And it's hard to feel too negative when you're that adrenalized, I guess.
Wow. I mean, so you had the fastest bike of the day, and whenever you get to the run and get in T1, you're putting on your Skechers and heading out. What does this look like for you? Are you getting a nutrition flask? I think you said that you do use a nutrition flask, right?
Yeah, so here's what I did in T2. I grabbed my race belt and had my sunglasses. I got some sunglasses from Zizou Optics, another cool local Canadian company. I don't have any deal with them or anything like that. I just like what they're doing a lot. So had those glasses tucked into the race belt so I could put it on all at once and put the glasses on as I was running. I also grabbed a flask with about 300 calories of that same blend. And this is what I've learned in the past. Like sometimes you can't be reliant on the first couple of aid stations. There's usually aid stations pretty quickly in an Ironman or 70.3 race. But in my experience, and I've learned this the hard way, they sometimes aren't ready for the lead male to be coming through. Like the volunteers are just kind of sitting around or not totally paying attention. And, you know, I've not gotten a gel for like 3 or 4 aid stations sometimes because the volunteers aren't quite ready. Now, to be fair, the volunteers in Tremblant are just totally on point. So they had everything figured out. That wasn't an issue. But it's nice to start getting calories in right away because I often finish my bike calories before the end of the ride and a little bit thirsty and hungry. So I had 300 calories of carbs right away I could start taking in a little flask. And then I also had my Suunto watch I put on. So I haven't raced 70.3s or shorter distance races with a watch really at all. I just like to pace intuitively by feel. And I did the same for the Ironman, but I did make the decision to put on a watch and then not look at it simply because I wanted to collect the data for analysis after. So similar to the bike, I'll glance at my power numbers a little bit. I'm not super hung up on them. It's more about perceived exertion and just, analyzing the tactics of the race and doing whatever it takes to get the best possible outcome within reason. So I have all that data. I haven't even really looked at it too closely yet, but it's there for analysis for my coach and I.
Wow. So as far as your placing already, you're already in the lead of the race at this point, and at some point you do a turnaround where you can actually gauge how far back Lionel and the rest of the pack is. When did you actually realize how close they were to you?
So the Tremblant course has it's a 2-lap course, and you can kind of see a turnaround at about, I guess, 10K and 20K and 30K. So you can roughly around those points, you can assess the competition. So the first 10K mark, I had no idea what my lead was coming off the bike. So I didn't really know that Lionel was putting time into me at that point. It was only later when I looked at splits that I realized that he was definitely continuing to chip away at my lead. After having faded a little bit at the end of the bike, he was running the first part pretty strongly. And I could tell that I think our gap was more like 2-3 minutes at the first 10K mark. And probably even less because I didn't even see him at this little lollipop at the half marathon mark. So I figured he was really breathing down my neck. So I fully expected him to catch me really at any point of the bike and run, and was pretty surprised that I managed to hold him off. It wasn't until really like the last turnaround point of the run around 31K that I realized the lead had just grown like a lot, like exponentially. So that wasn't until then that I was really confident I had the win.
Wow. So the run, are you experiencing any pain, GI issues, or cramping at all?
No GI issues at all, which directly related to the fueling plan was a huge positive from the day. Really my biggest positive take home, I think. No cramping. Definitely felt a few ominous twinges from my quads and hamstrings on the hills. So each lap of the two starts with some rollers coming out of transition in the finish line area. And those are pretty nasty, especially the downhills. It's true when they say the downhills are worse than the uphills. So I felt a few twinges, and I really was just hoping that wouldn't wouldn't develop into a full cramp or something like that, because that'd just be awful.
Right. Now, as far as the run goes, how do you know how hard to push on the earlier stages versus the later stages?
Well, like I said, I wasn't checking my watch at all.
Right.
So it was just entirely by feel. And I think that's always been a strength for me. Like in training, I can run without looking at my watch. And then I like to play a little game where I guess the average pace and distance. And I'm usually like really, really accurate. So that's something I've developed over many years. Same with workouts. Like I can usually hit my target kilometer pace or something, or 400 meter pace on the track quite precisely within a pretty big range. And it can be a little more difficult coming off the bike because tired bike legs just don't give you the same feedback. And that's where I think those brick workouts really helped. They really helped me. So in training, I was definitely looking at my watch a lot on those brick workouts and realizing like, okay, this is what, after a 4-hour hard ride, this is what my legs feel like at 4 minutes a K. This is what they feel like at 3:30 a K. So I had a really good sense of that. And I could tell I was going out. Basically, I took whatever pace I thought I should be running, backed it off just fractionally, because everyone I talked to before the race said, just be patient. Everyone goes out too hard in the marathon. So I was a little bit conservative, but at the same time, when you're leading your debut Ironman and stuff, and there's that much media around you and stuff, it's pretty exciting. So I decided to go for it a little bit and, be a little less cautious than I might otherwise have been. So I went through the half in 1:21, which is, on pace for a 2:42 marathon, which is not too shabby. Ended up running a 2:49, but I wasn't pressured in the second half of the run nearly as much.
Wow. Now, what was this like whenever you went by the finish line the first time? Because it's a 2-loop course, and you can look over to your right, I believe it is, or it might be left, to see the finish line, and then you have to go on your second loop. How was this for you?
Oh, that part is one of the highlights of the entire race. So the spectator support and volunteer support in Tremblant is really without parallel anywhere in the world I've been. There was probably so I think there was 2,500 athletes roughly, and easily another 10,000 spectators and volunteers and stuff out on the course. And not just like the finish line area, but all over the course. The finish line area was insane. It was like people stacked 10 deep and stuff at the barriers. So that part was incredible. I had to turn down a lot of high fives and stuff. People, by the way, it's not that I'm being mean to not high five you when I'm leading a race, but I try and save the high fives for the end, because if you high five someone, especially if they're running the other direction, if it's another athlete, that just kills so much of your momentum. So I'm sorry, I just can't do it. But there's so many people out on that part of the course, and so much noise and music and stuff. And there was a live band. It was just really, really cool. So that was kind of a secondary low point of the race. I mentioned the end of the ride. Once I got through there, though, that just totally lifted my spirits and put me in a much better headspace. And I think that's true for everyone that does that race.
Wow. So being that you're here on your own, I know that you wore a sleeveless jersey or a sleeveless kit rather for this course. Did you worry about getting sunburned at all?
Oh man, did I ever get sunburned? It's peeling right now, and all my lane mates at the pool have been laughing at me all week because it's pretty nasty. So I paid for that. That was stupid. I'm generally really careful about sun exposure, and then I fry myself to a crisp like 3 or 4 races a year in the heat. So I didn't put on any sunscreen. That was stupid. That's one of the main reasons I look into sleeve kits. I stuck with a sleeveless kit because there's this big move towards sleeved kits now. Everyone kind of assumes they're more aerodynamic. I've personally tested them in the wind tunnel twice, and they've not been more aerodynamic. They've been on par or even worse than my sleeveless kit. And I've seen similar data from other athletes. For every athlete that tests faster in a sleeveless kit, I can show you a counterpoint of another athlete that doesn't. And these wind tunnel studies with sleeved kits, they're put on so carefully in the wind tunnel without any wrinkles and stuff. Brand new suit, often pulled over a dry body. It's really different than when you hurriedly pull on a sleeve suit in transition and then race in it for several hours on the bike. You can look at race photos and see all kinds of wrinkles in the shoulder area, and those are really bad in terms of adding drag. So I'm very skeptical of any results in these contrived wind tunnel studies that show big advantages for sleeve suits. I just think that in reality, it's rarely nearly the extent people expect. So that's the reason I've stuck with my ITU kit. And that's a question I get like way too much. I probably answered that question about 40 times since the race.
Oh, really? Well, I didn't mean to just drive that home again because
I'm thrilled to have a platform to tell a lot of people that. So maybe I'll get less private messages about it.
Well, good. Now, as far as this run course goes, you're out there, you had the fastest run of the day, but you're still out there on the first one through this whole course. Did you see anything funny that sticks out in your mind?
Oh, nothing's coming to mind right now. I was prepared for like the, low-key field of vision hallucinations like we'll talk about in Ironman. I didn't get quite that far gone. There was one pretty surreal moment where I think it's about the deep into each lap, like maybe the 8K mark or something, getting pretty close to the turnaround. There's a band playing on the side of this trail, and there's like no one else out there. It's just a few aid stations, one of the few areas without a lot of spectators. It's just this narrow trail through the forest. And on one side, there's like this brass band playing like marching band music and stuff. So as I approached them the first time, I'm thinking like, is this for real, or is this one of these Ironman hallucinations everyone's warned me about?
Wow. So as far as the run course goes, miles 15 or hold on. Kilometers 30 through 38. How were these going for you?
That part went pretty well. I was definitely slowing in pace. I like to think I could have kind of maintained the same pace I went through the first lap if I'd been really pressured. So if Lionel would run up on my shoulder or something and we were just gutting it out for the win. Because I didn't need to do that, I wasn't stupid enough to completely smash myself. I'm already kind of shocked at the recovery total of an Ironman, even without being pressured all the way to the line. So I can't imagine what would happen if I actually had to smash myself there. I'm glad I didn't. So I just kind of backed it off a little bit, really focused on fueling. So by the last turnaround, 30K, 31K, I knew the win was pretty much locked up. Lionel kind of had defeat in his eyes, and he gave me a high five. He's a real class act. We've been racing for many, many years now. I think I've raced him at least 10 times, and I've never beaten him before really in a fair and square situation where he's been able to have a good day. And I know he had a tough day in Tremblant, and he had every excuse to just step off the course and save his legs for Kona. But he was very gracious, respected me, respected the other finishers and stuff by finishing and pushing through a really tough day by the sounds of it. And, gave me a hug at the finish line and had really nice things to say. So respect to him. Even though he looked like he wasn't going to be a threat, I still didn't want to mess this up. I know people have had major issues towards the end of an Ironman, so I just focused on fueling, focused on controlling the pace, staying loose, and tried to enjoy myself a little bit too, because you don't get to win your first Ironman again. So it was a pretty cool experience.
Because this is your first one and your first overall. I mean, that's got to be some kind of excitement building up, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm really doing this.
It was really crazy exciting for a lot of reasons. I think, being my debut Ironman and stuff, and my first win at that distance, of course, that alone would have been exciting anywhere. You add to that the fact that it's Mont Tremblant, which is kind of the biggest, most prestigious Canadian race, kind of like the de facto Canadian Championships almost. That was huge. Had tons and tons of supporters out there. Also, the race has never been won by a Canadian on the men's or women's side since it began in I believe, maybe 2013 or 14. So there's that as well. And then have to definitely call out the coverage too, which was just phenomenal. Like what Ironman is finally doing, covering pro races now. Not all of them, but some of them, and Tremblant was featured. The Facebook Now coverage was just amazing. So I knew that all these people would be tuning in who might have never really had any exposure to triathlon before. And just the feedback after the race, like I had high school friends, extended family members, people I'd never even heard of saying like, this was my first triathlon. This is the first triathlon I'd ever actually seen coverage of. I had no idea what it was really all about. And I was glued to it all day, just tuning in periodically to check how things were going. So it was really huge for a lot of reasons for me.
Wow. Now, the final few kilometers of the race, how do these go for you?
The final few K, I was all about just trying to enjoy it. So, I didn't want to do anything stupid. I was hitting the aid stations, taking in calories and fluids right up until I think the last aid station at about 40K. I even had a bit of water. But at that point, your focus is shifting away from taking in a bunch of calories and just trying to enjoy myself, like looking around, smelling the roses a little bit more, slowing the pace. And then I'm finally giving out some high fives because I can afford to at that point. And, smiling for people and giving thumbs up and stuff. And also cheering for some of my friends who were heading the other direction. I had a lot of friends and supporters out there. So it's nice to be able to give them a boost as well because they cheered for me so strongly all day. And then the finishing chute was just something else. Like it was, of course, if you're a pro, you got to make sure like your kit's zipped up and not all wrinkled up and stuff. You got to showcase the sponsors properly. So that was all good. And coming down the chute, just slowed down and gave lots of high fives and smiles for the camera and stuff. And it was really overcome by emotion. I'm not usually really emotional at finish lines, but yeah, like first Ironman experience was definitely something I'm not going to forget.
Wow. So tell me about the finish shoot. How was this? I mean, I know it was emotional, but give me the details of what it was like.
Yeah. So I know some pros give some thought to how they're going to celebrate at the finish line and stuff. I didn't even presume to do that. I feel like I'm not superstitious, but that almost feels like jinxing yourself if you have a finish line celebration planned or something. So I just kind of grabbed the tape, and without even really meaning to, I just kind of sank to my knees. And in fact, I'm still sporting these two huge, like bruises and abrasions on my knees from basically skidding along the red carpet. And I had all kinds of supporters right at the finish line. My homestay from last year, Ann Herbert, was there to greet me. She's almost like my surrogate mom in Tremblant. Like she lost her partner this year, who I was good friends with. And so we were both really emotional about that and stuff. And I was really touched that she was there to greet me. I had Rachel Bleckman from Ventum was there to give me a hug too. She's one of my biggest supporters and stuff. And the race director was there, and all these people I've been dealing with over the years. I've been racing in Tremblant. It was really nice for them to be part of my day and to be able to thank them for making it happen, you know?
Wow, that's awesome. So you get your medal, you do the champagne toast or shower. Who won the champagne shower?
Oh, Lionel absolutely got revenge on the champagne battle. So the downside of being a winner is that you're the last one up on the podium. So the second and third place guy have already been opening their champagne bottles. And so it takes, I've done maybe over a dozen champagne battles now, probably like 15 or 16 for my podiums. And I'm pretty good, I think, at getting the cork unpopped and getting the little twist tab off and all that, but not as fast as some of these guys. So Matt Russell and Lionel were ready for me, and I didn't get my bottle open to be able to respond for about another 30 seconds. And man, champagne in your eyes, just it hurts like nothing else. So I couldn't even like see for about 5 minutes after. Lionel just blasted me right in the eye. So we were all hugs at the finish line, and then he saved that little thing for the champagne battle, I guess.
That's awesome. So yeah. You get done with the finish line extravaganza for a little bit, and you go back, get a shower, and relax for a little bit while the race is still going on, right?
Yeah, I was kind of wandering around like a lost child, just talking to people for about 2 hours after. It probably didn't help my sunburn that was brewing, I guess. And then Rachel from Ventum, who I mentioned, who's also kind of like a motherly figure, she just found me and rounded up my gear and got me home for a shower and some food. But I tried to talk to as many people as possible, and I knew it's traditional for the winner to go back for the last finisher, which is usually at midnight, but it was at 1 a.m. in this case. So I came back around midnight, and for about an hour or so, gave out hugs and medals and stuff to the last few finishers. And that was seeing the race from a whole other perspective, like I have 70.3s. I've usually gotten out of there pretty quickly and haven't stuck around too much. This was really cool to see people coming at the sport from a very different experience. And, it's different in some regards. They're out there for twice as long as me. But what struck me is, how similar it was in other regards. Like there's the same emotion at the finish line, the same sense of accomplishment. It was really cool. There were some great stories too that Mike Riley and, Mr. Ironman Voice was there relaying to the crowd. And like, I don't know if this is typical, but the scene at Tremblant, I've heard it described as on par with Kona, even if you can believe it. Like it's just so many people out there, even at 1 a.m., fireworks, just music. It was like a total party scene. And I was exhausted at that point. I'd barely slept like 4 hours out of the last 36 or something. But it was so worthwhile just to be there. And, another part of the experience I won't be forgetting anytime soon.
Wow. So you were able to give a guy named Brian his medal. Did you understand what Brian's accomplishment really was, or his background in the sport?
You'll have to refresh my memory a little bit. There were a few really inspirational stories. I think I remember who Brian was. Was that his seventh attempt?
Yes, that was his seventh attempt.
I remember that one. So yeah, that was really cool to be able to give him his medal and stuff, and I could tell he was touched by that. So that one was definitely very memorable as well.
Wow. Now, after you wrap up from the race, how was your recovery process?
Yeah, so I guess the double-edged sword of winning a race is that everyone wants a piece of you basically for the next week. So the week after the race was anything but restful. I actually decided to stay an extra day in Tremblant because I had to drive myself home, and I was just in no shape to drive home. I barely slept the night after the race. After staying up till 1 a.m., had to be up reasonably early again to go to the brunch and chat with people and give a little speech. And then, media dragged me out for some interviews, talk to some more people. At that point, I had to excuse myself because I knew it was time because some guy asked me to autograph his hat and write an inspirational message. And Terry, I was there for like 5 minutes trying to think of something relevant to write on this guy's hat. And I was just coming up so short because my brain was so tired. So I don't even remember what I ended up writing. It wasn't very good. I'm sorry, buddy. But I just got myself out of there at that point. Went home, had a long, strange nap, and that kind of kicked off a few days of really weird sleep. Dragged my sorry ass home on the 401, the big highway from that area to Toronto, near where I live. It's a pretty miserable drive, but really just riding the high of all that excitement, and had a lot of podcast requests, interviews, and sponsor stuff over the next week rather. Did an appearance on Saturday at a local race. I'd like to keep up my presence locally here in Ontario, even if there aren't any professional races these days. So I was at MSC Wasaga Beach on Saturday and meeting lots more people. And it was really cool because some of these people had been in Mont Tremblant, and they said, I was one of the finishers, so you gave a medal to, and that meant a lot to me. So it was neat to actually be able to talk to these people when they were a little more composed and ready to chat. So yeah, it's just been a crazy experience. I feel like I haven't totally come down off the high. I was expecting to, feel inevitably a little depressed at some point because you just can't be on that kind of high for so long. But it's been more of a gradual come down, and I don't feel sad at all right now, and I'm just looking forward to the next one.
Wow, that's great. So what's something that you learned from this experience that you'd want to pass on to someone who hasn't done this race before but has some experience doing races?
I'm not gonna take the tact of giving like some kind of really inspirational message. I think I'll give some more practical advice. It's no stretch when they call fueling and nutrition the fourth discipline for Ironman. So I know I've done better in long course than guys who are better swimmers, bikers, and runners than me. And I think one of my secrets or one of my strengths is that I've paid a lot of attention to fueling. I've practiced it. I've trained it. I've researched what works best for me. That's really, really important. I can't emphasize how important it is to have a good fueling plan in place and to be really confident that you've tested it out in training and it's going to work for you given the conditions and unique demands of race day and the course. So I talked to a lot of people at the race, and, in the following week and stuff, who reached out to me saying like, I was on track for a great day, and then, everything melted down because of my nutrition at halfway through the run. So it's a really common story among everyone, whether you're finishing in 8 hours or 17. So that's really important to have figured out.
Wow. Now, if we look back on it, how well prepared for this race do you think you were before you towed the line?
I think I was exceptionally well prepared for this race, and that was really no accident. Like, people were assuming I kind of wanted to fly under the radar because it was my debut and stuff, and no big expectations. It was quite the opposite. So every interview I've done, going back to the start of the year and even last year, I said, "Yep, I'm going to be making my debut in Tremblant, and I want to make a splash." And there's a couple ways pro men can make a splash. You can go under 8 hours, and that isn't going to happen on a course like Tremblant. The new course record I set is only 8:10, so a very slow course. The other way you can make a splash is by winning or setting a course record. So, it's pretty clear what I was targeting, and I wasn't too quiet about it. I try not to be like too cocky for the most part, but probably the biggest departure from my usual, pre-race interviews, I made no secret about the fact that I wanted to win this race, and it didn't really matter who was on the start list. I still wanted to win the race really badly, and I think I prepared to make that happen to the best of my abilities. So I blocked off the whole summer to train for it. Was really meticulous in my preparation, and this was like a 2 or 3 year plan basically.
Wow.
So it was really, really validating to have it all come together.
Wow. Now, if you could change anything about your experience here before the race happened, what would you change and why?
It's hard to look back on, they say you don't learn a lot from the races you win, and you learn a lot more from the bad experiences. And it's really true. I've still tried to kind of force myself to be a little bit more introspective and critical of the whole thing. I think I would have gotten out a little bit more on Saturday. So I was pretty nervous by Saturday night because I'd kind of just spent the whole day inside my head. I had dinner with my homestay, which was really nice distraction. They're really pleasant people. But I think I could have made an effort to just hang out with some more friends and stuff instead of just being inside my own head. And I think that would have put me into a
bit of a better headspace on Saturday because I was definitely feeling a little overwhelmed and frankly terrified. There's definitely kind of you hear about start line arousal as the term applied to racing. There's an optimum level of start line arousal, and it's not cool as a cucumber, and it's not so sick or so like nervous you're making yourself sick. But I was definitely towards the higher end of that start line arousal / nervousness.
Wow. Now, as far as Ironman making your race experience better and better from an athlete's perspective, how could they do that?
It's really hard to be critical of Tremblant because they've asked me this exact question every time I've raced there, the 5150 and the 70.3 the last few years. Every time the race director and the head ref, I've chatted with them after the race and they've said, like, Cody, how can we make this better? And Tremblant, the organization and everything, they pride themselves on having really the premier race on the circuit in every regard. Like, they just really dot the I's and cross the T's with every aspect of the athlete experience, not just for the pros, but with everyone. So, you know, he posed me the same question again, Dominique Pichet, the race director. And I came up short. I really couldn't think of anything better. Like they really hit the ball out of the park, I think. And what really was the icing on the cake for me was the exceptional coverage they had. Cause it's one thing to have a great race experience, but for other people to be able to share in that too, that was really special to me. Like my 90-something-year-old grandmother in Toronto, she somehow on her tablet managed to find the Ironman Now coverage, which was awesome. And she tuned in and she got to see me cross the finish line for the first time ever. Wow. So she called me and left a really emotional message on my voicemail and stuff. And that really, really made the experience for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So for first timers that are doing this race next year that have not done an Ironman ever, what advice would you want to give them going into this race?
Well, first of all, pat yourself on the back. You know, it takes a lot of courage to sign up for any Ironman, and Tremblant in particular isn't one of these courses that's been dumbed down, which is kind of an unfortunate trend. We've seen a lot where anytime there's a difficult feature of a course, people complain and it gets removed. Tremblant is a really honest course. You know, it's legit in terms of distance and terrain and stuff, and it's a challenging course. I would say, I know I talked about coming in last minute because I already knew the course. I would suggest coming a little bit earlier for Tremblant if you aren't familiar with the area, because it's a course that's worth riding. Maybe not the section out on the highway, but that section on Chemin du Plessis I mentioned, you definitely want to have ridden that at least once or twice leading into the race. The swim, there's no real surprises. The run's pretty straightforward, but I'd really recommend pre-riding the bike course. And it's also just a beautiful destination to stay in before and after the race. It's one of the few areas where you can train really comfortably without fighting traffic or, really hunting for pool space or anything like that. They're trying to brand themselves, like the city of Mont Tremblant, as a premier training destination as well as a premier race. And they've done a great job with that. So book an extra few days before, stay on after. Great stuff for the family there. Lots of fun things to do. It's just a great place to hang out.
Wow. So we covered a lot about your race. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
I think we've about covered it, Terry. This has been a really thorough interview.
Awesome. So what's next for you?
Good question. That's what everyone's been asking me. So I'm on the start list for 70.3 Santa Cruz in about a week and a half now, and I booked flights for that and registered before the Ironman. And now I'm kind of questioning that. I think that I could be physically recovered again in a week and a half. I don't think I'm quite ready to give my all again. So psychologically, don't totally have my heart in it, I would say. And, there's a bit of pressure to perform now. I won 370.3s earlier this year, and now this Ironman, I'll be, a race favorite on pretty much any start list I'm on besides a championship. So that's pressure to deliver, and I don't really feel ready to go to Santa Cruz, and I don't think I'd be happy, and it wouldn't really serve any aims to wind up like third or fourth or fifth there or something. So I'm inclined to pull the plug on that one, probably make that decision today or tomorrow. And I think I'm going to do another fall Ironman. It's funny, after Tremblant, I was like, that was really hard. I'm not going to be doing those more than once a year or something like that. And let me tell you, it's amazing how quickly the memory of the pain fades. That's what everyone's saying. Like, you finish an Ironman and you're like, I'm not doing that again anytime soon. And then within days, you're already signing up for your next one. So true for age groupers, true for pros. I'm looking at another fall Ironman, and I'm leaning the most towards Chattanooga, which would be in about 4 weeks,
Wow.
4.5 weeks. Yeah, so I'd kind of be doing that off the same fitness as Tremblant. It would just basically be a minimal training block, another taper. And then I'm pretty eager to call it a season. It's been a long season. I've been racing since mid-March. The body's responding well still, but the mental energy is starting to run a little bit low, and that's just as important. So I know I can bang off one more good performance, and then it's going to be time to shut it down. I haven't taken a good month break, not totally off training, but month unstructured with a week or two off. Haven't really done that over my entire pro career. So my coach and I both agree it's overdue. Looking forward to getting fat and out of shape later this fall and coming back stronger next year.
Wow. So did you actually know that Roger Bannister actually took like a hiatus from running in general before he broke the 4-minute mile?
I had no idea. That's really interesting though. How long?
I think it was about a month before he actually went to the track and broke the 4-minute mile.
Wow.
Yeah. So
That's
everybody
crazy.
says that an off season really isn't needed, but there might be something there.
It's really important. And I've learned I hang on to fitness really well. So it took me a few years of realizing I'd finish my season and take a mid-season or take a break at the end of the season and then get back into some training and be hitting some of my best numbers after like 4 to 6 weeks of really having done nothing. So it made me appreciate like my fitness decays very, very slowly, especially on the bike. So it gave me confidence to sign up for another race like 6 weeks after Tremblant without really having done a whole lot of training for the past month or so.
Right. Well, if you do Chattanooga, I'd love to have you back on after that race.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Awesome. So you've been in the sport for many years now. You've done countless 70.3s, and now you're starting to work your way into the full distance. I'm assuming you want to toe the line at Kona one day, but aside from Kona, what races are on your bucket list?
Yeah, so I've had an opportunity to do a lot of the races on my bucket list already. I was really gutted that 70.3 Muskoka is no longer a pro race. I raced that one a couple times. It was my first kind of breakthrough results as a pro, and so I'd love to go back there again one day if it's ever a pro race. And it's also really sad that 70.3 Silverman is totally done as of the last few years. I think 2015 or so was the last year. That was just a phenomenal race. But I'm most intrigued right now by a lot of the Asia Pacific races.
Really?
I just raced Taiwan this year for the first time, and that was my first time racing in Asia, and kind of brought that more into my comfort zone now. So I'm going to be looking at some of those next year for sure. Of course, Challenge Roth is a race I hear just rave reviews about, so I think that should be on everyone's bucket list. And there's some really historic ones like Wildflower, for example. That sounds like a pretty cool race. But hopefully I've got at least another decade in the sport to explore these races.
Wow. Now, how can athletes follow you if they want to follow your journey?
Yeah, they can find my website at codybeals.com. I try and blog fairly regularly and put up video recaps from races as well as other stuff. Going back a little further, there's lots of kind of in-depth articles on a variety of topics. I tried to be really transparent and share a lot about my process. You guys can find me on Instagram at cody.beals and on Twitter at cfbeals. And on Facebook, my page is Cody Beals Pro Triathlete.
Nice. Well, Cody, it's been really great having you on here. And with that said, I only have one more question for you. And that's, what's your definition of a perfect race?
The perfect race is a myth that doesn't exist ever. I think if I truly have a perfect race, I'm gonna hang it up and just retire at that point because I'll have nothing else to accomplish in the sport. That's the figurative end of the rainbow that we're all chasing, I think. And that's part of what makes triathlon so compelling for me, is that you can't string together a perfect race when there's so much involved in 3 sports and nutrition and transitions and everything. There's always something to improve on. And Tremblant was, people say, oh, you had a perfect race. I could point to a lot of things I could have done a little bit better. So I'll always be chasing that perfect race, and that's one of the main reasons I love the sport so much.
Wow. Well, Cody, it's been really great having you on here, and I would love the idea of having you back on after Chattanooga. And I look forward to following you in the future as well, and I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk soon, okay?
Thanks so much, Terry. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you were able to learn something from today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to leave a review on iTunes or share it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to see pictures from this athlete's race, learn more about who I am, what I'm doing, or be on the show yourself to share your story, check out my website at CoachTerryWilson.com. Until next time, continue the pursuit.